Right. I think we're just hoping we can speak on behalf of everybody.
Uh,
Best. Right. One of the first questions I'm wondering is just about you. It's you've probably have had both doses of the vaccination by now, I'm
I
thinking.
have, yes.
I'm wondering, did you experience side effects, and how are you
I
feeling?
felt a little, both times I felt a little crummy the next day. Just, I wouldn't, nothing major. Both times I did it on a Friday. So the next day I didn't have things scheduled, and I just kind of laid low. It might have been power of suggestion, if you wonder about that, you can sometimes imagine you feel bad. No, it was very, very minor if it was real at all.
Right. How's life been since? Are you feeling less uneasy or more?
Jordan, honestly, I have never felt uneasy at all. I mean, I felt, cramped like we all have at being able to do this or that, but maybe I was a little cavalier about it. I've always been really healthy, very fortunate that way. And the and plus with everything that we've all done around here, that everyone has done, I mean, I knew I was looking at the data every single day along with our whole team, and what started as a little bit of a facetious line that the safest place you could be is in a Purdue classroom or at Purdue turned out to be true, basically. And so I never felt uneasy at all. Just a little grumpy about being restricted, but we all understood the need for that.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so on the topic of vaccines, everyone's really in a flurry to get as many doses as possible, right, countywide. So what's kind of Purdue's strategy with working with the county, the state on securing doses for Boilermakers inside of really a place where everyone's trying to get doses, right?
Right. Well, we have to play by the rules, of course, but because we have the pharmacy school, because we built the whole Protect Purdue Health Center, really from scratch to over 100 people, we have resources, and we offered weeks ago that if the county wanted us to help administer, we would be glad to do that. And but that hadn't happened so far, and now they're up to I don't know, I think it's close to 20 or something outlets. So I don't think there are delays, but we're ready, and it's almost a joke at our morning meetings when we go to Willie Reed, who has done our vaccine planning, and in hopes that maybe he's seen the first truck, show up. So we're ready when we're given some to join in the administration. But you've probably noticed that the county and frankly the whole state are right near the top nationally in terms of their rate of getting the vaccine out. So that's encouraging to see.
Okay, and whenever Purdue starts administering the vaccines that it gets, all those going to go to first Boilermakers in the order basically of highest risk healthcare local students, or is it going to open for the community at large?
No, we'll follow scrupulously, as we have all along, the guidelines that are out there. Right now, they're age-based with exceptions for the I guess for the most vulnerable and for very few occupations, which I think pretty much been able to take advantage of it already. So you just saw the age came down another 5 years. We expect from things we see and hear that'll continue, and we'll move as fast as we're permitted to by the rules. Obviously, we're going to strongly encourage every single person, regardless their status, to be vaccinated as it becomes allowable for them. And if there's anything we can do to expedite that, we absolutely will.
Right. A metric that you mentioned is that classrooms are safe, and it's been touted that there's been no classroom spread. Each time I hear that, I'm curious, just because of how absolute it is. By what methods is Purdue tracking the idea that there's no classroom spread? Is it contact tracing mainly, or?
Yes. By the way, although some of our, in fact, many of our peers in the rest of the Big Ten have had serious trouble, some of them have shut down in the last week or two. Some of them never opened last fall, all that. By the way, I'm going to give you a little tip you may or may not want to run down, but first I'll answer your question. We know wherever obviously our contact tracing, our testing and tracing system, we've really refined and worked on, and so every positive case we have, we've been able to identify so far where we believe it came from, and none of them came close to the classroom. Now I have to say, our sister schools, again, many of whom have had very difficult problems. None of them has ever reported a classroom, a contraction from a classroom. So that's a pretty general rule. And if you stop and think about it, with distancing and masking being observed, and especially some of the cleaning and then as we learned, the ventilation, which we put a lot of money and effort into, probably was the most important thing, or one of the most important things. But yeah, no, I mean, I guess we're certainly happy when we got to the end of the semester and the number was 0, but it was always our intention to make it 0 or as close to that as we could.
A side note on the ventilation, I'm wondering what kind of investment was made, or what are the main differences that are going on as to a normal year?
Yeah, well, I'm not an expert in the mechanics of it all, mechanical engineering of it all, but it's a negative pressure basically. In other words, what the airlines are doing, and they apparently have been able to report a very, very good record too. And this is their principal defense, is that the air is constantly being lifted up and taken out. And so we retrofitted an awful lot of rooms that didn't already have that sort of thing. And it was I'm sure at least a 7-figure expenditure all told. But I think as things went along, we learned, when other people learned also, that this was probably more effective than things we really started out. I was telling people about all the extra cleaning we were doing of surfaces. Probably turns out there's not much transmission off surfaces, but nobody knew that early on. Talked a lot about plexiglass, and it might have helped some, but it probably was not nearly as important as these other things we just discussed. Right. And I'm sure you noticed every single time we talked about it, I went back to the really indispensable element, which was our students and their fidelity to the pledge and their behavior modification and compliance with everything we ask. As I told audience after audience and wrote about, if we could have done everything else as perfectly as we knew how, and it wouldn't have sufficed if not for our students. And I took some satisfaction and expressed it elsewhere that Purdue students had shown people who were very cynical early on that young people today could really adapt to a difficult situation like this so responsibly and helpfully.
Right. One more question on the crisis and its effects at Purdue. Can you walk me through the decision making that went into your announcement that we would try to resume a full residential experience in the fall, given that things stay the way that they are?
Yeah, well, but let me ask, and I'll send it over. Did you read the column that the Washington Post asked me to write about this?
Which one? When did you write this?
Oh, May or June. So I'll send it over.
Sorry, sorry, I'm actually referring to opening in fall 2021.
Oh, this fall.
Right, when you have the announcement, you say,
"Oh, I'm sorry,
we're going to try to resume a residential experience." I think that was a few weeks ago now.
Okay, excuse me.
What factors had to go right?
Okay, yeah. Well, first let me give you that little tip I mentioned because it's relevant to this. So we have, as we did last fall, between 70 and 75% of our courses being taught either fully or partially in person. The difference between fall and spring, the totals are not too different, but the difference between fall and spring is there's a big shift in the direction of fully in person. The number of the provost office has 46% of the courses entirely in person. And that's up from 28, I think, in the fall. So the total is close to 3/4, but it's but the mix in between shifted in the direction of in person. Now, there's one other school in our peer group which is close to that. That's Nebraska. But what I didn't know until last week, and it's not a public thing, you'd have to go school by school. The average of the rest of the Big Ten is under 20%. So, I frequently talk to students or hear from students who say, darn, I wish I had more in-person interaction. I say, well, we do too. And as fast as we can, we're trying to get you there. But students here would have no way of knowing, unless they talk to friends at other places, how vastly different this is. We are closer to the experience we want every student to have than by far than our peers. And I don't go around telling people that, but if you were to check around and got an honest answer out of people, that's what you'd find. Now, this fall, what we've said is we want to keep moving in the direction of the fully residential experience that you all anticipated when you enrolled here. And we do believe that based on all we've learned and our ability, at least so far, to manage this at levels well below anything we frankly ever anticipated, with the progress that's happening both in vaccines and natural immunity. You may have seen in the last week people speculating that watching the rates come down all over the country, that maybe we're further along in that path than we realized, which is possible. I don't know. It's possible, though, given the asymptomatic nature. As you know, among students, about half who tested positive never knew they had it. 83% never got more than one symptom. So in that situation, it'd be easy for a lot of people, more people, to have had it than any of us knew. Anyway, what we're trying to do, as we have at each step, is operate in a way that gives our students as close to the full residential experience as we can, consistent with our obligations to safety, and always preserving enough flexibility to make quick changes if the circumstances dictate. And that's the way we'll approach this fall from this point. We've got lots of time to figure it out. We could easily come to different conclusions, either more liberal or less liberal. The one thing we did have to do in the interest of students and faculty and everybody else is make some decision about the calendar. So we said we'll use the calendar, the typical calendar, including a break, and give some indication to faculty how to plan their courses, so you can look at so students can choose in a timely way. Everything else, if we have to come off of that, we will. We will never compromise safety. But if you look back at that column I wrote for the Post, there were two decisive factors, and they're still the same. One, it was that this virus is dangerous in certain populations, but not the one that our students are in. And secondly, that our students overwhelmingly wanted to be here. And so our point of view was, it's our duty to try to figure out a way to do that in a safe way. And that's still our outlook. So I would refer you back to the column I wrote, the Post was interested in the very same thing. What is that? 9 months ago.
Right.
What's your thought process? And it hasn't changed and it won't change. We will do everything possible to safeguard faculty, staff, and students here. But we believe the science has been clear for a long time that if you do all the right things, if you do all the things you can absolutely still enable you and your fellow students to keep moving in your educational careers in the in something like the way that you envisioned.
Okay. Thank you. On kind of a different topic, we've been following the development of the equity task force quite closely. And at the last Board of Trustees meeting, they were kind of discussing the results of the fact-finding reports / we're going to, I believe, see some of the results from those fact-finding reports and board packets in the March meeting, or they will be presented. And so I was kind of wondering if we can get any sort of detail on what the task force has found, what are some of the problems of equity that have been identified on campus, what are the facts of the fact-finding report that trustees have reviewed.
Yeah. Well, it hadn't all been, I haven't yet received, what we're waiting for now is really direction from the task force, and it'll be soon, and it'll be formalized, I believe, at the April meeting, so in a few weeks. And but they were pretty clear about the areas they identified where they're going to want to see the most effort, investment, and additional work, and that has to do with, obviously, with recruitment of students, recruitment of faculty, success of students, graduation of students, so we're looking forward to having that. I mentioned at the last board meeting that we have been studying and preparing a series of major new initiatives for the university for its next chapter. And this is going to be one of them, which is meant to signify its importance. It'll be right there with multi-million-dollar other investments in research and new capabilities. So you'll be hearing about all of that. But it's all going to come, I think, together in the next few weeks, and we'll be ready when it does.
Okay. Will the reports that those initiatives are based off of and the research that the Equity Task Force has done so far also be made public at that time?
I suppose. I mean, it's up to them, but I suppose so. There's some important information in there. There's not a single issue at Purdue University that's not true at every other major university in the country. In some places, facing much more difficulty. The task force, I think, looked at all that. And, what I think we all want to do is find things that will be effective. So I'm sure their work has illuminated a lot of that.
Okay. On a slightly different note, a lot of Purdue employees have been kind of following and appreciative we've heard of the $750 bonuses that were handed out last year, despite the loss of the pay raise due to COVID, everything going on, obviously. So we were wondering if that system of pay raises might be reinstated, retroactively put in for people who then missed out on a year of expected raises plus anything that was to happen this year.
No.
What can employers?
Yeah, no, I mean, what we've said is what's going to happen. We fully intend, and right now, I don't see anything that would change this. We fully intend to go back to a normal pay raise in just a few months here. Again, I don't know that the Exponent has ever looked at this, but if you looked around at other schools, big layoffs, big pay cuts, nobody raised pay. So we've heard from a lot of other people who were at other places who rather wish that their schools had been able to do something like we were able to do. But I think that, at a time when we were spending tens of millions of dollars on the safety of everybody, I think most people understand why we had to take a pause in in business as usual um, with regard to raises as we did in so many other ways. But I'm very glad that we found ourselves in a position where we could do what we did. You know, the checks that were sent, of course, were for some of our employees were as much or more as they would have gotten in a standard percentage situation. And we very purposely aimed it at the lower, you know, to benefit the lower wage employees more. And of course, the highest wage people didn't get it at all, but that's that was very much our thought process. But we're looking forward to getting back to being able to give merit raises soon. And, you know, thank goodness we can. There'll be so many places that won't be able to.
Right. And then as Purdue is so different from those other universities, what do you think put Purdue in the position to do that and not have to do massive layoffs?
Yeah. Well, I just, two things. I mean, one has been we've been cautious about our spending. We've tried to concentrate it. We've worked very hard, for instance, to maintain or grow the ratio of faculty to students. We try to invest our money where it's essential and be careful about those things which are nice to do but not must do's. So that was one. And secondly, we have been fortunate that so many of you have shown up. You know, other schools, many other schools have been shrinking. Higher ed has shrunk as a total category. I think it's 8 or 9 years in a row. And some schools have really declined in enrollment. We, of course, have grown, and that's been the other important driver. And so of our ability to do things that others were unable to.
Okay. And now with that, are there any particular aspects of the university's financial status that you may be more worried about or focused on? Tuition freeze, new construction, COVID expenditures?
Great questions. I mean, we ask them all the time. We ask them in and out of extraordinary moments like this. But you know, while we never take anything for granted, Purdue has been steadily strengthening financially. And when I talked a minute ago about the next set of major investments, which will include things to support the Equity Task Force and these other announcements that you can expect here shortly, that's exactly because we have, while balancing our books each year, we have been able to do a little better than that every year, and we will use those surpluses to invest back in what we hope will be an even stronger institution. So, you know, I think we count our blessings a little bit that we're in a position to make those kind of decisions when, if you're following the trade press around higher ed, there's some really sad circumstances facing many other schools. I mean, some schools are just closing, some of the smaller ones, and others are doing very severe things. There are faculty losing tenure, which was unthinkable not too long ago. And so none of that's happening here. We don't want it to. But on top of that we're in a position to, I think, very prudently make major investments of the kind that we have and that we are about to do again, I believe is responsible. And it also certainly is an indicator that we're in a somewhat stronger position than many.
Yeah, on the note, higher ed is struggling, as you've highlighted in almost every answer here. With a new Congress and a new presidential administration, are there measures that Purdue administrators think about that should be passed to help higher ed and help students and faculty?
I usually start with a list of things I hope they won't do, you know, because, you know, to be honest, you know, some of the cost, a lot of the cost in higher ed is imposed by government. Much of that is perfectly reasonable, the oversight of this and that. When the government's pouring as much money into higher ed as it does, it's entitled to ask a lot of questions, but some of them would probably make you chuckle a little bit if you knew some of the, we know we file a lot of reports no one ever reads. Um, we comply with a lot of rules that probably don't uh, enhance the educational experience or the safety of the place or any of that. So, I mean, I hope that they'll remember that every new edict they issue or rule they prescribe costs somebody. Ultimately, it costs our students or costs students somewhere have to, you know,
Right.
pay for this. So that's a starting point. Um, you know, the government is apparently going to borrow a lot of money and send it out with regard to the current situation, and a lot of that will come to higher ed. Um, and we will try to spend it appropriately, whatever restrictions come with it. But um, to be honest, it's not something we have to have here. There may be places that do. I wish they'd clean up the whole student loan and student finance situation. We've talked about that in the past. You know, that's a whole topic unto itself, but the federal government, to a large extent, created this problem, including the cost problem in higher ed. It's very well established that when people say, why did the cost of higher ed go up 3 times faster than everything else, that the fact that it's been so heavily subsidized was a driver has been well documented. And so, you know, at some point, I hope they reform those programs in a way that delivers help to students who need it, but doesn't create problems that offset that help.
A couple more granular hot button topics for students. First, I want to say is, do you support Biden's plan to raise the federal minimum wage to $15? And a second one is, what do you think can be done in terms of student loan and debt forgiveness? As you just sort of alluded to, there's a lot of student debt.
I have nothing to say about the minimum wage issue. It's been around for a long time. And you know, there are arguments on both sides. I will say that I think it's dubious to have one rule for the whole country, because it's a whole lot more. $15 goes a lot further in some places than others. It's a whole more expensive in some places, and so I think it could be done with a little more care than it might be proposed. But frankly, I think it's fine to raise it. I don't know whether it should be raised everywhere, and I don't know if that's the right number. But it's been at the same number for a long time. So, you know, they do need to be careful. It's well established that it will cost jobs. That some people, as they have required to pay somebody more, will pay fewer somebodies. Happens there's no question about that. And so that, again, just you hope that if and when it's done, it's done with some thoughtfulness about all that. By the way, young people lose most of the jobs that are lost. So,
right, the lower paying jobs.
Again, it's a good idea, I think, to make some adjustment, but I hope they're careful about the way that it's done. And on you know, student debt and the rest, you know, our attitude at Purdue has been, let's do all we can do so that students don't have to borrow money or don't have to borrow much money in the first place. We have a record percentage each of the last several years, a growing record percentage of students leaving here with 0 debt. That's a great goal. I think you've seen the numbers. We can supply them if you haven't looked lately, about how much less debt there is than a few years ago at Purdue, and how much less debt per student. And so that's the best thing higher ed can do. And what is I keep saying, don't charge so darn much in the first place. And then students will not be forced into the corner that many have found themselves in. I'll say finally, I believe there's some great unfairness in the idea of just blanket forgiveness of debt. And apparently, I mean, first of all, it will benefit wealthy people who really don't need the help. And secondly, I think about that 99+% of Purdue grads who pay back their loans, and how unfair it would be to them if suddenly other people were just let off the hook. So I really worry about the fairness. I feel that the fairness of it's very questionable. Now, on top of all that, the greatest unfairness of all is the incredible debt that's going to be dumped on each of you and everybody in your age cohort and ones on either side. Astonishing, and in my view, unconscionable. This country has didn't intend to, in most cases, people didn't think of it this way, but policy after policy after policy has favored older people at the eventual expense of your generation. And here comes another couple $1 trillion of monopoly money that will have to be paid back one day. And so this troubles me. And you forgive student debt, as was pointed out in a Brookings paper last week. Brookings is a left of center institution. Pointed out it would favor wealthy people, and it would be a bigger welfare program than any of the ones we operate right now, all at once, not aimed at the poorest among us. So I do think that it's, they're going to do what they're going to do, but I think there are many better ways to address a real problem, and one day I think people will look back and believe that our leaders behave recklessly in a variety of ways now that are problems your generation will have to lead us out of.
Yeah, and I just have two quick questions from our sports desk who really wanted to get in some things.
Yeah.
Just recently, I believe Notre Dame was in the news for its kind of dealings with EA and the likeness of players. And Notre Dame has said pretty explicitly that if players are not paid for their likenesses, not for playing, but for their use of likenesses in video games and media and that sort of thing, that Notre Dame will not participate or allow that. So I was wondering if you had any comment on the ongoing discussion of paying players for their likenesses.
Yeah, well, this is going to be a reality, I think, through either court action and or legislation. And I think that it's, on the one hand, I understand the fairness. I don't know if it'll be a common or uncommon occurrence among Purdue athletes, but I understand the argument that says that at least in some cases, there's a legitimate value that the athlete should share in. I do believe that there will be abuses, and I don't know how they're going to avoid it. You know what the kind I'm talking about, where the booster writes a big check if you'll come play here and not Purdue. We'll write you a big check. I'll put you on a billboard. I don't care if it sells another insurance policy or not. That would be one of many, many ways that this thing could be abused. But it's quite apparent that society's made a decision that to take those risks, I guess. So that it's coming, and we will live with it. We'll try to do it in a way that is that guards against abuse. And by the way, this is not the only feature. There's a case that's been decided requiring, I should say this the other way around. It says that the NCAA cannot prevent schools from paying players more than is currently allowed to play. And the case is on appeal to the Supreme Court, so might change. But if that comes, that'll be yet another challenge. To me, it's been a point of pride. It was important to me, even in deciding whether to come here. It was one factor that Purdue has operated a self-supporting athletic program. You don't pay anything as you would at many other schools. There's no fee, hidden or explicit, on our students. There's no raid on the treasury to support athletics. And I think that's appropriate. But as these things come along, it's going to be a little harder, to do that and still be competitive with there, because there are schools who aren't troubled by these issues. So
paying athletes could mean trouble for independent athletic departments, essentially, you think?
oh, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, there's some that just couldn't do it at all. This is a whole other subject, but your department ought to be paying close attention. I mean, there's, in my view, and I'm a huge sports fan, and
Right.
have hope that we have something like we've had in the future. But I think for a variety of reasons, there's likely to be a very transformed landscape not too far out. In the last years, you've seen a number of schools have shut down some programs altogether, including some of our Big Ten sister schools. And it'll be unfortunate if that continues, but the dollars have gotten huge and might get bigger, and there's only so much revenue to support that. So I will say that I continue to believe it's very important that the athletic department here support itself, maintain itself, and we have lots of alums who help them do that. That's part of it. That's okay. I'm talking about donations, but they've run a very good ship over there. Under Mike Bobinski and his predecessor, the late Morgan Burke. And we've been very competitive, but we've had a high integrity program. We haven't had scandals here. And they have, as I say, your student readers have not been taxed, or don't pay a special fee just for those programs, which a lot of us enjoy a lot, but many of your fellow students, it's not as big a thing to them, and it would be very unfair, I think, to charge them for that.
Okay, and last sports question. I know that in the past, maybe before my time here, that we've run like Mitch's picks for upcoming March Madness, and I was curious if that wasn't going to be a thing anymore because of Purdue's now ban on betting on.
Oh yeah. Oh, well, I guess that's right. Well, first of all, although it was fun, it was especially hard a little before your time. Take football and 1 year basketball. I guess we usually did this in football, and there were a couple years we just weren't too good, but I had to pick us every week anyway, because I can't afford to not be on board. For the record, I had a pretty good record, even though I had to give away a few of those that were obviously not very high good odds. No, I mean, that's right. We have that rule, and it's a good rule. And I suppose my suggesting who might win, even though I didn't have anything riding on it, might be in violation of it. I wouldn't want to take the chance. I mean, if you asked me, I would think about it. Let me tell the sports desk, if they want to try it again, I'll think about it, but we'll all have to think together about, is this different or not from the ban?
Right. Started off with the personal question about vaccines. I think people who were on campus a couple of years with you as president might have seen you at the COREC. They might have seen you at Ross 8 or in Mackey.
Yeah.
Curious, what are the biggest lifestyle changes as Purdue president that you've experienced?
That is it. And I've told a lot of people this. I appreciate the need for it. I know I need to try to model good behavior, distancing, and all that. Even though I don't, as I said, really never felt particularly worried about this virus. I need to observe all the things we are encouraging people in my age category and so forth to do. Yeah, I miss it a lot. I miss it for two reasons. I mean, one is, and by it, I mean being out among students a lot, dinners in the dining courts, or uh, just, random encounters, visiting classes, either to sit in the back or just, sometimes I've been asked to, speak a little in classes. Haven't been able to do hardly any of that. Um, and then the co-rec, I had to start working out at home,
Mm.
which is just not the same. So, yeah, I really miss that. I said I never really had an office job before. I said I had two reasons. So one is it's fun. It is part of the enjoyment of the job. But the bigger reason is I think it makes a person better at the job. I've always said, whatever your responsibility is, don't get insulated. Don't get a cut off from, I always say, ground level. You just learn things. You hear about problems a little sooner. Maybe you can fix some. I can't tell how many times a student would bring something to my attention and we go try to, address it. That we might have taken a lot, might have not gotten done for a while. And you get ideas that you wouldn't have thought of yourself. So I just think it's good practice, whatever your assignment is, to try to do that. And here, for me, that has meant, as much as anything, mixing it up with students. And so, yeah, it's different. I don't like it that way, but I appreciate the importance of doing it until we're all feeling completely good about relaxing, things like that.